Hey guys, today we're going to start working on the 91 Cheyenne shop truck. One of the least favorite parts of the whole build for me is working with springs and knocking out bushings out of control arms. On the blue 95 truck that you might have seen in some previous videos, the whole front suspension was replaced with some tubular control arms, so that left the 95 upper and lower control arms and brakes and everything that I left aside for use on another project someday. Well, that someday is today. So rather than pull the control arms off of the 91 and replace the bushings and ball joints on those particular parts, I have the control arms that came off of the 95. Today I'm going to show you how I get the bushings and ball joints out of the upper and lower control arms. The upper control arm is pretty simple. Just a stamping. There's not an inner and outer like there is on the lower side, and you can tell by looking at these, they've been in there a while, and I've been shooting some WD-40 on these things every day for over a week, and yeah, you can't tell it. Ball joint on the upper control arm is held in by a nut and 3 rivets, but there's 3 rivets, we got to cut those out. On the lower ball joint, you can see it's pretty nasty. Come around this other side. You can tell this is original. It's shoved up in there really good. And on the bushings, you can see there's a flange there. The way this is stamped, there's an inner and outer. So you have to be careful not to crush these when you're pushing on them, or pushing in new ones or pushing out old ones, because you don't want the stamping to be damaged. And I had a piece of pipe. It's not perfect by any means. Just a round circular piece of pipe, cut it in half. There's the other half to it. And I simply cut it lengthwise to create 2 halves. This is a part of a hinge, and I welded that to it. And then they're each a little different width. Like the one side of the control arm, that will fit into like that, and on the wider side, this fits in down like that. Now like that, hard to do with one hand, so that you can see as you're pressing on it, it won't crush. Okay, and then last but not least, I do have my Harbor Freight press that I got several years ago for Christmas. This little piece here I made when we go to press out the lower ball joints on the lower control arm. This fits around the base of it, like so, so that we can push from the top and push into it. This plate's on the bottom, it's been welded so that it won't move, and then a hole is there, made that so that if I'm pushing something into this and it gets sideways a little bit or it gets stuck, I have a way of putting a punch through there, a screwdriver, and knocking it out. Okay, we're going to start with the lower control arm first. I do wear gloves, and I've got a face shield on to protect myself. As you can see, the part I spoke of earlier, we put it right below here. It goes around the ball joint on the base. I'll set it in there like so. Then I use a socket. This one's pretty good size, 15/16. Slip that over it like that to push down on, and then to make it a little easier to disperse the pressure, I put a little steel plate underneath here, and this is just a 4.5 by 4.5 inch plate, 1/4 inch thick, that is used for home foundations. ball joints out. Now it's time to get the bushings out of the lower control arm. The easiest way I've found to do it is to use a drill and to drill through the rubber, because if you try just pushing this thing out, it's been in there 25 years. It's rusty on the inside and the outside. You gotta push really hard and you stand a chance of deforming the control arm. So the little spacers I made to protect the two sides, I use those for the installation of the bushing. So let's just drill this out. Broke my drill bit. There it is. This is what's on the inside. These are kind of nice to keep. You might be able to use that for something else. Now, I still got the shell. The inside of this is perfectly cleaned out. What I like to do is to use my cutoff wheel and put a couple notches in it, then use my hammer and punch to drive the shell out. There it is. And there it is. That inside piece I want to keep. On the front side, the bushing, it goes in, it has a little 3 dimples that kind of hold it in place. This one does not. So this one is a little easier to get out. Okay, half of it. Okay, the good news and the bad news to the whole bushing ball joint mess is that the lower control arm bushings are the most difficult to get out. Now we want to tackle the upper control arm and getting the bushings out of that. Okay, it was coming out, it was just at a slight angle there. One thing I want to take note of on these bushings when they come out, you can tell by looking at that how far it was seated in the control arm. And you want to make sure, because it's a single flange unit rather than double flange like on the lower control arm, that you measure the distance from where it seats to that line. Draw a line on your new bushing so that when you press it in, you press it into that point. Otherwise, if you press it too far or not enough, then it's not going to fit in place when you go to install it. It's seated properly. sure and note, as I stated before, which bushing came out of what side, so that you can make the mark on it, because they may not be exactly the same. Okay, and you can see how far it was seated. So I'm going to mark these as to the position they came out of, so that I can make sure I make the correct marks on the new bushings and get them in the same depth. Last but not least, the ball joint. Also, something I wanted to point out on the upper control arms. These bushings, sometimes when you look like at Rock Auto or some other place, maybe even your regular auto parts store, they come in two different sizes. It may be listed as both a 41 and a 43 millimeter. So I'm using my gauge here, checking this one, and it is a 43 millimeter. Let me see if I can get it closer. Maybe hard to see, but that's 43 millimeters. So you want to make sure that when you order your upper control arm bushings, go out and measure them first before you order them to make sure you get the right one. I don't know why there would be a difference. I couldn't find any literature that would tell me why some are slightly larger and some are slightly smaller. But just to be sure you get the right part so you don't get it all torn down and then try to put in your bushing and find out you've got the wrong bushing, measure them first. And you can get one of these cheap calipers. I believe I got this at Northern Tool. It's less than $10. It's well worth the money. It's also great for taking to the salvage yard. So if you would need to measure the diameter of hoses or sway bars or whatever you're looking for that requires a precise measurement, this is a great little tool and it's cheap. This is a close-up shot of the upper control arm ball joint. You can see it's got 3 rivets holding it in place. Here, here, and here. That bolt went in there. We took it out. That was no problem. So we gotta cut these 3 rivets out, pop them through, and remove that ball joint. Got a face shield. And the ball joint's out. Got the control arms up here on the work table. This is a steel welding table, rolling workbench. Our upper control arms, our lower control arms have all been knocked out. The takeaways we can take from this is this bushing may come out pretty easy. And this one takes 2 hours. There's not one single way that works for every bushing. Just kind of have to get creative. Getting the 3 rivets out for the upper ball joint actually turned out to be a little bit more of a problem than I thought it would be. I thought it'd be a piece of cake. It wasn't difficult, don't get me wrong, but it was a little bit more work than I expected. Getting the upper control arm bushings out was probably the easiest, along with the lower ball joints. The lower ball joints popped out pretty well. You don't have to have a hydraulic press like the one I've got. You can use the ball joint tool that I have. That would have worked as well, but the press was just easier to use. I would recommend starting with your lower control arm bushings first. They're probably the most difficult. Getting them out took some work. There was one that literally took me about 20 minutes to get out. It came out pretty quick. I drilled out the rubber, knocked out the shell. Well, that's oversimplified, but I spent about 15 to 20 minutes and got it out. The next one took me an hour and 15 minutes. So it just goes to show you, these bushings and ball joints have called these control arms home for the last 25 plus years. So getting them to vacate was a little more work than I had expected, but it's very satisfying to get that done. One thing I did notice on the lower control arms, you can see the hole here. it's slightly elongated. That's for the sway bar end link. So both of them are that way. So what we're going to do is I will weld that up a little bit and grind it out and make that where it fits, where it's round again instead of being slightly oblong. So I can look here and see they're both that way. Before we restore these back to like new condition, we're going to weld those holes up, grind them out, make them round, and then we'll paint them, put in the bushings and ball joints, and make them look brand new. Until next time, thanks for watching.